Margaret Sanger was born on September 14, 1879, in a small New York town, a figure whose impact would spark intense debate for generations. Margaret Higgins, the sixth of 11 children, grew up in a working-class Irish-American family. Her mother's struggles with 18 pregnancies deeply affected her, shaping her interest in women's health. Margaret's nursing career exposed her to the harsh realities of unplanned pregnancies and unsafe abortions, motivating her to control the female reproductive cycle. In the early 1910s, Margaret worked in impoverished areas of New York City, witnessing the dire consequences of poverty and lack of family planning. This drove her to write articles advocating for contraception and eugenics. In 1914, she launched The Woman Rebel, a publication. Her radical ideas led to her arrest under obscenity laws. To avoid imprisonment, Margaret fled to Europe, where she met with controversial European birth control pioneers. Upon returning to the U.S., Margaret opened the first birth control clinic in Brooklyn in 1916. The clinic was raided due to operating illegally, and her subsequent arrest brought widespread attention to her cause. Despite Sanger facing mounting legal challenges, public support for birth control grew. In 1923, Margaret established the Birth Control Clinical Research Bureau, which evolved into Planned Parenthood. Margaret Sanger's legacy is deeply controversial due to her association with eugenics. She collaborated with Lothrop Stoddard, a noted eugenicist, incorporating eugenic ideas into her advocacy for birth control. Sanger's eugenic views had alarming connections to the Nazi regime. American eugenic principles influenced Nazi policies on selective breeding and population control, contributing to their racial purity laws and genocidal actions. Sanger's writings included extreme eugenicist views. She argued that individuals deemed feeble-minded should not have the same reproductive freedoms as normal people. Her proposals included segregation and sterilization of these groups to prevent them from reproducing. In other words, Sanger argued that feeble-minded people should not be granted the personal liberty to reproduce as much as normal people. Rather, she proposed the segregation and sterilization of feeble-minded groups. Specifically, she argued that every feeble-minded girl in her childbearing age needed to be segregated in order to prevent her from bearing imbecile children. Sanger also argued that the male defectives are no less dangerous, claiming that segregation of women would only handle part of the problem, and therefore, the immediate sterilization of men was needed to ensure that parenthood is absolutely prohibited. To the feeble-minded, therefore, Sanger demonstrated clear objections to free abilities to reproduce in lesser than groups of society, and she recognized the way in which birth control could help prevent population growth in feeble-minded groups. Sanger's problematic viewpoints and stances surrounding birth control did not stop at eugenics targeted at poor people living in city slums. Sanger was also an important figure in linking birth control to reducing the population of African Americans. In Medical Apartheid, the dark history of medical experimentation on Black Americans from colonial times to the present, Harriet Washington describes that while Sanger was a complex, passionate woman that shaped American reproductive policy by instigating the fall of the Comstock laws, pushing the developing of the birth control pill, and founding what we know today as Planned Parenthood, she did so in ways that blatantly harmed the African American population. The BFCA quickly planned the Negro Project, a project that, while claiming to be established for the benefit of the colored people, resulted in the formation of family planning centers that were found to be problematic for many reasons. First, these clinics were likely erected as experimental clinics aiming to find the best way to reduce or eliminate the African American population in regions densely populated by African Americans. The BFCA, which Sanger was a key figure in running, demonstrated clear racial motivations in erecting these clinics and took actions that would bias the medical field against African Americans for decades to come. Margaret Sanger got in tight with the Ku Klux Klan circles and cozied up to more like them. In April of 1933, the Birth Control Review, Margaret Sanger's magazine, published a shocking article entitled Eugenic Sterilization, an Urgent Need. It was written by Margaret's close friend and advisor, Ernst Rudin, who was then serving as Hitler's director of genetic sterilization and had earlier taken a role in the establishment of the Nazi Society for Racial Hygiene. Later in June of that same year, the Birth Control Review published an article by Leon Whitney entitled Selective Sterilization, which adamantly praised and defended the Third Reich's pre-Holocaust race purification programs. Sanger openly advocated for eugenics. In her book, The Pivot of Civilization, she says, eugenics suggests the reestablishment of the balance between the fit and the unfit. The birth rate among the finer stocks of humanity is to be increased by awakening among the fit the realization of the dangers of a lessened birth rate in proportion to the reckless breeding of the unfit. From this type of writing, she became dubbed by the awareness concerning her advocacy, which hailed as more children from the fit, less from the unfit. Ms. Sanger backed up that mentality of wanting some kind of a bigoted supreme race in much of what she said and did, and it becomes more clear the more one studies her. Take her stance on voting rights. We can all vote, even the mentally arrested, and so it is no surprise to find that the moron's vote is as good as the vote of the genius. The outlook is not a cheerful one. Sanger's controversial approach extended to African American communities. She once stated, the most successful educational approach to the African Americans is through a religious appeal. We do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the African American population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to their more rebellious members. Today, statistics reveal a stark reality. A significant number of Planned Parenthood and abortion clinics are located in minority communities compared to suburban areas. This distribution has sparked ongoing debates about the implications for those communities. Additionally, the rise of feminism and abortion rights activism has not always led to greater happiness for women. Studies suggest a paradox. Despite increased freedoms and rights, women report low levels of happiness compared to previous decades. Research from the National Bureau of Economic Research indicates a steady decline in women's happiness since the 1970s. Another study by the University of Pennsylvania found that, despite advancements in education, employment, and reproductive rights, women report lower overall life satisfaction. Margaret Sanger's complex and controversial legacy continues to provoke discussion and reflection on the ethical implications of reproductive rights and eugenics.